As we come together this morning, let's contemplate the vastness and the complexity of the universe in which we live. We see pictures from the Hubble that boggle the mind when we consider how large this universe is, how everything seems to fit together in a perfect order. And if we take that macrocosm and come down to the microcosm at Earth, at the tiniest levels, we see that same order. Everything is in its place. Everything is functioning perfectly. Even those things that we may not believe are functioning perfectly are functioning perfectly. There is order in this universe. There is harmony in this universe. And we have to ask the question, why? Where does this harmony come from? Where does this order come from? Why is there anything instead of nothing? Why is there order instead of chaos? We look at the magnificence of these bodies that we have. We see that they are intricate organisms. Some cells specialized into eyes and others into bones. Some are soft and transparent and some are hard and opaque. The heart specializes in moving the blood. The lungs specialize in taking in oxygen and giving off carbon dioxide. The kidneys remove the impurities from the blood. In amazing detail, as we contemplate these things, we recognize that we too are part of the order and the harmony and the intricate detail of the universe. There's one life, we call it God. It is perfect, it is whole, it is complete. And it is expressing itself in us, as us, and through us. So at the very core, the very center, the very essence of our being, there is perfection. There is harmony. There is the wholeness that we know as health. And we recognize, as Trine told us a few weeks ago, that the bridge between this spiritual perfection that we are and this human experience that we have is our consciousness, are our thoughts, our beliefs, our emotions. As we attune our thinking with the love and the kindness and the perfection of the divine, we open the gate. We allow more and more of that health, that goodness, that perfection to flow into and through every cell, every organ, every tissue, every system, every function of our physical bodies. every emotion of our psyche, every thought of our mind. As the darkness disperses as soon as the light is turned on, any and every idea that is not in harmony with divine perfection is dissolved into the nothingness from which it came, as we open our hearts and minds to the perfection of God. We are grateful for this opportunity to be together today, to know that there's a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief, and to more than just know, but to actually cooperate with it consciously. So we release this treatment, this conscious cooperation with the way things are. We release this treatment to that perfect law, knowing so certainly it is done, that we say together, and so it is. Good morning, everyone. I'll make this announcement at the beginning, I'll make it at the end, and I will follow up with an email. This is with regard to the Wednesday night Zoom. Jeannie reminded me when she mentioned it in the opening. This week we're going to do something different. We're going to watch a YouTube video, and it is the first episode of a four-part series, four-part documentary by filmmaker Adam Curtis. The documentary is called The Century of the Self, or The Century of Self, and part one is called The Happiness Machine. And we're just going to watch it and discuss it. And, we're going to try to look at it in terms of what it's telling us about consciousness. And the entire series is all about how we form our ideas and how we form our beliefs, and how if we are not careful, not paying attention to what people are trying to tell us, that it's easy for people to be manipulated, to be fooled. And it kind of, the reason I wanted to discuss it is, it really falls in line with the question of, how do we know what we know? Are we thinking about what we are thinking about? Because if we don't pay attention, if we are not observant, we are missing out on kind of the greatest asset that we have as conscious beings, right? To be aware of thought, to be aware of what we are thinking. So it's on YouTube, Century of the Self, The Happiness Machine, Adam Curtis, and I'll send a link out later to the email distribution list. But if you want to watch that and join us on Wednesday night to just discuss it, what ideas did it bring up for you? How does it relate to anything else that you've ever experienced in your life? We'd be happy to have that discussion. Okay, so this morning we are continuing on with a little bit more of Frederick Bales. And last week we started from his book, Your Mind Can Heal You, which, as I mentioned, is an excellent book to have on your bookcase, but not just to have it there to look at the spine, but to take it down and to read it and to reread it and to think about it and to test it. And so we want to kind of consider what Dr. Holmes told us. He said, we are spiritual explorers in the unexplored territory of mind. The unexplored territory of mind. And he called the teaching religious science, and people had a lot of trouble with that. It's an oxymoron, because religion is one thing and science is another. And what he was telling us, and he was responding, I believe, to something that William James said in his book, Varieties of Religious Experience, which was transcribed, I believe, when he was doing some lectures in Edinburgh, Scotland. They had conferences on metaphysics. They had conferences there on religion and spirituality and metaphysics. And James went there and spoke, and he said, nobody has ever studied religion, the way that science would study anything else. And I think that's what Dr. Holmes was responding to. What if we just took this kind of this general bailiwick of things or beliefs or philosophies or dogma or all these different things that kind of get lumped into the bucket of religion, and what if we kind of looked at them as a scientist might? What are the commonalities? What are the differences? Is there anything that we can learn by simply observing them, by analyzing them? Now, this is important because in order to do so, we have to detach ourselves from our opinions. We have to step back and become the observer, right? So typically what happens in our society is if somebody is an adherent of a particular religion, when the topic of religion comes up, they tend to take the position of defending and attacking. They're going to defend why their religion, why their way of thinking is the right way of thinking. And they're going to find fault with other ways of thinking and other teachings and other religions. Now, I grew up in New York at a time when we were taught you don't ever talk about religion or politics. You just don't do that, because it doesn't lead anywhere. And I think the French have a saying when it comes to matters of opinion, there's no logic, there's no discussion. It's a matter of taste. It's just what somebody wants, what somebody prefers. But when I moved from New York down to North Carolina in 1971, people were very, very, very pushy, I would say, about their religion. Or there's somebody new, we need to invite them to church. Now, I'm sure that they were doing it out of a sense of kindness, a sense of being friendly and bringing people into their community and those things. But I was kind of flabbergasted when people would come up and say, well, where do you go to church? What church do you go to? And don't you want to come to my church? And of course, there was one Catholic church in the entire county at the time, and people would tell me all of the different things that they knew about the Catholic religion, and none of them were true. They had learned these from other people who didn't really know much themselves, but these were all the things that were wrong. They were coming at all. Well, my God, you have to eat fish on Friday. That's ridiculous. I said, no, we don't have to eat fish on Friday. Who told you that? And I won't go into all of the other mistaken beliefs. But my point is that when we are an adherent of some particular faith and the topic of religion comes up, it tends to fall into that type of a defensive, aggressive conversation. Well, your way is wrong, my way is right. Here's why my way is right. Here's why your way is wrong. Yada yada, back and forth, and nothing comes from it. Right? So this is, I think, why we were taught as children: don't ever talk about religion. Nothing good can come from it. Dr. Holmes says if we can drop that, trying to determine right from wrong, just drop that and observe it, we might find something different. And it just reminds me of Rumi's quote, beyond ideas of right doing and wrong doing, there is a field. I will meet you there. So if we could stop and analyze the different essence of religions around the world, we might be able to do that as a scientist, and we might be able to find some way of defining in general terms what this thing called religion is. And this is what Dr. Holmes was calling religious science. Now the other thing about it is that in any science, there's a theory, and then there are practical experiments to prove or disprove that theory. And he said it should be the same way with this topic of religion, with our ideas of religion. Now we're talking about health this month, and the idea is that through a spiritual practice such as treatment or affirmative prayer, as we call it, physical healings occur. Well, that's fine to say that. It's fine to believe that. But the rubber hits the road when we test that, when we prove that. This is why last week, in the course of the discussion last week, I said, test it yourself, go out and what evidence can you find to prove or disprove or add to the conversation about, do our thoughts, do our states of mind actually have an impact on our physical health? Do they or don't they? And if they don't, then there's no sense worrying about trying to change what you believe, because as far as you're concerned, there's no effect, right? And Holmes tells us this as well. He says, even if a law works, if we don't know how to work with it, it might as well not exist for us. So it's one thing to say, yeah, there's this power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief. But if you haven't been able to find a way to convince yourself of that by actually working with it, by actually producing some type of a result in your life, through a change in your belief, through cooperating with this power, then for you it might as well not exist. It just might as well not be there. One of the examples that we get is that if you consider Moses leading the people out of Egypt and wandering across the desert, they were lost for 40 years now. Now that's a parable, or there's a spiritual interpretation to that. But if you consider that they were lost wandering for 40 years, you might say, well, why didn't they just turn on the GPS on their cell phone? Why were they carrying fire when they could have had flashlights? And you see, the laws and the physics that make flashlights possible and make GPS possible, they were in effect, they were in existence at the time that Moses and the Hebrews were wandering around the desert. But they didn't exist for those people because they didn't know about it. You see, they hadn't thought about it. Science had not yet advanced to the point where people knew of these things. So they had to continue on functioning in a physical manner. They had to light fires at night. They had to use smudge pots and smoke so everybody could see which way the column was going in the day. And they wandered for 40 years, you see. So what Dr. Bales is telling us as we start to get into the second chapter now, he's starting to kind of give us a little bit of theory, and asking us again to consider. So Holmes tells us if a thing works, there's a way in which it works. And anyone who discovers the way in which it works and cooperates with that way, anyone can use that thing. Anyone can work with that thing. Electricity. We use electricity to light our homes. We use electricity to power our air conditioners and to heat our homes and all these different things. And electricity works according to certain fundamental laws of electricity, which any one of us can study. We can study and we can learn how to wire up circuits. Excuse me. I was up in the mountains yesterday and the pollen there was spectacular, so my nose is running a little bit today. Any one of us can learn, how to wire an electrical circuit. It doesn't require, a special degree. It doesn't require an IQ of 160. Anyone who applies themselves, we can go down to the community college and you can sign up for a course and you can become, certified to work on electricity. But any one of us who complies with the way electricity works can wire the circuit in such a manner that if we throw the switch, the light comes on. If we throw it the other way, the light goes off. Right? And the reason for that is that electricity functions according to certain consistent laws, consistent principles. The law of electricity, or the laws of electricity, if you want to think of them that way, they have no personality. They don't play favorites, you know. So it's not as if I go over to throw the light switch and the law of electricity says, well, Jim, and you know, we're not too fond of you. We're just not, the light's just not going to come on, you know. And then Lori goes over and throws the light switch and the law of electricity says, oh, yes, Lori will give light. Either one of us can go throw that switch. Either one of us can throw the switch and the light will light. Because electricity does not play favorites. And this is what Bales is trying to get us to consider in this second chapter. He went into it in the first chapter. We didn't quite get to it next week, and he kind of expands upon it in the second chapter. So the first thing we wanted to consider was, do our thoughts have some type of an impact on our bodies? Now this kind of opens up a whole can of worms in what are thoughts, you see. What is thinking? What are thoughts? Where do thoughts come from? Where do thoughts go? This is one of our basic meditation techniques in observing thoughts. Oh look, here comes a thought. Where did the thought come from? Oh look, there it goes. Where did the thought go? Am I the one thinking the thought, or am I the one observing the thought? Or am I both the thinker and the observer at the same time? For whom does the thought arise? From whence did the thought come? All these different things in analytic meditation that help us to become aware that there are thoughts. There are these things, these mental impressions that we call thoughts. But when we are growing, when we are children and we are growing, when we are developing our egos, we claim everything. We say, this is my thought. I had a thought. You know, well, did you? How did you have that thought? Explain to me how you had that thought. Maybe you just observed that thought. See, maybe that thought was there and you just observed it. So we now have stepped into a bigger can of worms because we're saying, well, that which we think and that which we believe, see, that has some impact on our bodies, our physical health, and it can produce illness as easily as it can produce health. And we say, well, that's terrible. How could a kind, loving God, you know, give us this illness? And we want to think back to electricity, the laws of electricity. Now, any one of us who will take the time to learn how to use electricity properly and how to wire a circuit properly, any one of us who can do that, well, we can, in fact, get the light switch to turn on for us. But if we miswire it, if we don't pay attention, if we don't know what we're doing, if we just haphazardly go in there and slap down wires, well, we can do harm. We can harm ourselves, we can harm another, we can cause a fire, you see. But electricity has no personality. Electricity is not saying, well, for you I'll light a light, but for you I'll burn a house down. Electricity is just more or less acting according to the way it's being used. Excuse me. For those who have used it intelligently and who have complied with the way it works, they get the result that they want. The light comes on, the heat comes on, the air conditioning comes on. For those who have not used it intelligently, well, they may or may not get the result that they're looking for. So Bales gives us this to try to remove any superstition, to try to remove any fear, to step back objectively, as a scientist might step back objectively and look at this and say, what we want to do here is, first of all, we want to know, is there this power in the universe, call it law of mind if you want, call it whatever you want, but is there this something that responds to us according to our belief? And then if there is, how do we cooperate with it? How do we learn that, you know? You can imagine, I think it was Mark Twain who wrote Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. It was about this then modern day person who was somehow transported in time back to the era of King Arthur, and trying to explain to people, you know, the things that we knew from his day, and people could not understand. Right? They could not understand it. So you can imagine us trying to go back to Moses and say, you know, there's this thing called electricity. And the first thing he would want to do is say, well, prove it. You know, prove to me that there's this thing called electricity. And if we could successfully find a way to do that, maybe with lightning, maybe with static electricity, if we could do that, then the next question for Moses might be, well, so what? How do I use it? How do I make it work? So this is why I left last week and I said, do you really believe that the general tendency of our thoughts, what we are thinking, what we are believing, can and do produce physical effects in our body? And the other thing that we covered was, we don't necessarily have to be thinking of a particular disease or a particular symptom. The example that Bales gave us was the man who came down with arthritis and couldn't walk. And by the way, when I reread that story this morning, Bales said that the man had gone through having his tonsils removed and having all of his teeth removed in hopes that that would somehow cure his arthritis. And it hadn't. But when Bales worked with him, Bales found out that the man was irritated because he had to walk over to his sister-in-law's house every Sunday, and he didn't want to do that. And over a 12-year period of time, his body became so crippled up that he couldn't walk. But in 2 months' time, according to Bales' account in the book, in 2 months' time of working with Dr. Bales, the arthritis was cured. So we want to think a little bit more about this. What evidence is there in this world? What evidence is there in our own lives that by changing our thinking, we can produce a change in our bodies? And as I said last week, if we don't believe that, then there's no sense going any further, because that's kind of like a buy-in. That's a fundamental requirement. We have to establish for ourselves whether or not we believe that's true. Now, I'm going to mention at work, and as I said, I'll probably try to delve into it in the future, but it's a little bit difficult to work with because it's mostly statistics, statistical analysis of different things. But the title of the book, there's actually a couple of them called, by Dean Radin, R-A-D-I-N, Dean Radin, Ph.D. I think he's at the University of Arizona. I think he's in the psychology department there. But you can look him up on the web and see if I'm right. But the title of the books are The Conscious Universe. And he goes through one thing after another, after another, after another, and analyzes them to see, does consciousness actually have an impact on what we call matter? So if you have doubt, you might want to find a work like that and start to read it. This morning I was looking up Herbert Benson. Benson was a cardiologist and started to get into the mind-body connection. And he wrote several books about the placebo effect. You know, what is it? What is the placebo effect? How does it work? Is there anybody studying it? You know, I think his first assertion was it works much better than it's usually given credit for, which even if it only worked as well as it's given credit for, I think we need to look at it and say, hey, what's going on there? That's interesting, isn't it? And I think he tried to reframe it as called remembering wellness, rather than the placebo effect. So what happens is in our intellect, we try to put a label on something and put it in a pigeonhole and say, oh yeah, I understand that, I have a label for it. That's the placebo effect. And you got to say, okay, well, what is it? Well, how does it work? Well, what does it do? Why is it even there? And the idea is simply, that people are given a substance that has no known chemical properties for healing, and physical symptoms change. They get better. It's not that they thought they were sick and now they think they're better. It's that they had physical symptoms and those physical symptoms went away. And Benson says, why isn't anybody looking at that to determine, how does it work? And can we get better at it? Can we find a way to be more efficient? So when I was reading through it this morning, and he's written several books on the topic and several papers, and you can find those on the internet as well. An excellent, just be thinking, be looking, be exploring. Be curious, most of all, be curious. So I found a paper this morning, and they said, well, these scientists have published a paper and said that they proved that the placebo effect doesn't exist. And I said, well, that's curious. That's interesting. I need to look at that. And I only caught the abstract of it. I didn't read the whole article, so I can't tell you that I'm giving you, an entirely accurate representation. I'm just kind of reading. I read the article and I read the abstract. But they were working with people who were dealing with pain, and their pain levels would subside as a result of the placebo effect. And what these doctors did, or these scientists did, was they gave people an injection that blocked the natural chemicals in our body that can ease the sense of pain. And what they found is that when they gave the people the injection and they blocked the action of the chemicals, that the people still had as much pain as they did before. And the article went on to say, see, there is no placebo effect because it's all chemical. And I'm saying, wait a second. You just proved that because the people believed that their pain was going to be lessened, something happened. Something was released in the body. A chemical was released in the body that did in fact address their pain until it was interfered with this injection. So to me, in looking at it, it says, well, why did this get released in the first place, you see? You can't say it doesn't work because I could stop it after it happened. Why did it happen? So these are the kind of questions that I invite everybody to explore. And curiosity has got to be the most important thing that we have, the most important thing that we can do. We have to be asking why constantly. We have to be able to ask that without fear, without superstition, without being told, don't ask those questions, take things as a matter of blind faith. All the things that we may have heard growing up, we have to ask why. Dr. Holmes' brother Frederick wrote a loving biography about him, and in it he says that their mother called Ernest the little question mark because he always wanted to know why. He always wanted to know why. Now, I love science fiction. I love the old original Star Trek episodes. I love Gene Roddenberry and his writing and the things that he could do. Science fiction writers could put things in a far, far away place, and they could deal with what's going on here, but it was safe to talk about it because it was something that we were watching and observed. It was way distant in the future, and it was way far off in space. So a lot of the science fiction movies have this theme that there's some sort of a problem that has to be solved. I mean, drama is all about that. Drama is there's a problem that has to be solved. And the scientists have to get together and they have to figure out how to solve this problem because it's going to save humanity. I think it was Twilight Zone or Outer Limits or something I watched when I was a kid. Black and white, long time ago. But the program was that the military goes to these top scientists' house in the middle of the night and tells them that nuclear war is about to break out and they have to come with the soldiers. And this collection of scientists is all put on a nuclear submarine, and that submarine dives down below the surface of the ocean. And they're told that there's this particular problem that they have to solve if the human race is going to survive this war. They have to solve this problem. And these scientists, go to work. They've got a limited amount of time. They can't live underwater in a submarine forever. And they've got to figure out how to solve this problem. And they do. Of course they do. And then they also figure out that there was no nuclear war. They find some seaweed that floated down from the surface, and it's not contaminated, and they know that there's been no nuclear war. And they asked the skipper, the sub, well, why did he do this to us? And the answer was, well, there was a sense of urgency when you thought there was war, and people tend to perform better, so we created this scenario for you so you would work better. So in the science fiction movies, we tend to have this scenario. See, there's some type of a problem that needs to be solved, and there's a sense of urgency, and then we have to put all these great minds together, and they have to solve it. And as human beings, we love to solve mysteries, right? Reading, I think Agatha Christie's first book was written 100 years ago. Still popular today. We still love Agatha Christie. We still love her characters. We still love the mysteries because there's something in the human mind that wants to know. We want to solve that problem. How do you get people to listen? Whisper, whisper. What's going on? I've got to know. How do you get people to pay attention? Tell them, well, most people don't know this, but I'm going to share this with you because it's a secret. You see, when people hear that, they listen, they pay attention. If you go back and look at the metaphysical books that were written in the 30s and the 40s, there's always the secret of something. The great healing secret, the great secret of wealth, the great secret. There was even a movie a few years ago called The Secret, because people want to know. So here's the scenario I would like to ask you to consider. Suppose we put you in a room, and there was this huge computer, like a big sci-fi computer, the big UNIVAC computers, or the whole wall was just kind of lit up with flashing lights. We tell you that in this computer is the ability to answer any question, to solve any problem, to do anything that needs to be done, to heal any disease that needs to be healed. And you would say, well, that's great. This computer, it has everything we need. It can answer any question. It can tell us how to do anything we want to do. It can heal any disease. It can tell us how to do that. That's wonderful. What would you do next? You would say, well, how do I turn it on? How do I communicate with it? How do I interface with this computer? How do I get it to answer questions for me? You would want to know how to work with it. You would want to know how to cooperate with it. Now, even if you didn't know anything about computers whatsoever, which nowadays everybody does, we carry one around in our pockets. We talk to people on it. But if we didn't know anything at all about a computer, we would probably go around and start fiddling with switches and turning things on and off. The first computers I worked with, they had a teletype machine, and that was the way you communicated with the computer was through the teletype machine. Wow, when monitors came up in the keyboards, that was a great advance from the old teletype machine. But yeah, we sat down and got a little chair and sat at the teletype machine and punched away. You'd want to know how to communicate. You would want to know how to ask. You would be curious. Now, we want to talk about accountability and responsibility. Right? Responsibility means the ability to respond. Accountability means the consequences. Some consequences are positive and some consequences are negative. The person who experiences the consequences of doing or not doing something, that is the person who is accountable. The person who has the ability to do or not do something, that is the person who is responsible. Excuse me. Now, sometimes it's the same person and sometimes it's two different people. Maybe I have a machine and the machine is broken, and I want to have it fixed, and I hire somebody to fix it. They have the responsibility. They supposedly have been trained in mechanics and they know what to do. But if they don't fix it, it's still my machine, it's still broken. So they have the responsibility. I have the accountability. When it comes to our life and it comes to our spiritual growth, we have both, and we are the only ones in our life who can do it. No one else can change your thinking for you. No one else can do your thinking for you. No matter what people tell you, they can't do your thinking for you. They can't tell you what to believe. They can't go in there and change your beliefs. But if, as we say, if there is this power in the universe that responds to us exactly according to our belief, and we are the only ones who can change our beliefs, then we are the only ones who are both responsible and accountable. So we can continue to live life as purely human beings, going through life dealing with the law of averages, accepting things as the law of averages, or we can begin to learn how to use that marvelous computer that is within us that can help us to answer any question, to help us to do whatever needs to be done, to help us cure any disease, to help us produce health and maintain health and project health. So how is it that when people believed that something was going to relieve their pain, their body released a natural chemical that in fact reduced their pain? How does that work? See, we don't know how it works. We don't know. But the fact that it released the chemical shows that it does work. There is something there. There is something that works. Now Benson, in one of his books that I read, I can't remember which one, he raised the question of why isn't anybody exploring this seriously? Why aren't we doing more research? And I think the answer posed either there, it was posed either there or I read it someplace else. But if you think about this for a minute, research today, the research that we have into disease and cures is driven by the companies that make money off of that, the pharmaceutical companies. And I'm not saying that making money is bad, I'm just saying that this is the way the system works. As a product manager, you look at something and you say, what's the opportunity, what's the cost? You know, what's the risk? Can we make enough money off of this to justify what we're going to have to spend to find out how to cure it? That kind of thing. Well, who would make money if we could get better at using the power of thought, the power of mind, to produce healing? Who would profit off of that? Well, nobody. So nobody's funding research. Why would they? Right? Where is this kind of research going to come from? But you and I can do our own research. You and I can work in our own lives. You and I can be our own little test bed, if you will. So just as if I put you in a room and I said you have this beautiful computer and it can answer all these questions, but you have to learn how to work with it, I want you to consider that you already have that beautiful computer. It is within you. Right? It is the spiritual truth within you. It is the true nature within you. And as Trine told us a couple weeks ago, we have the spiritual self, which is perfect, is whole, is complete, because it is part of God. And then we have the human experience of that spiritual self, which is created by or filtered by our beliefs. So St. Paul said it's like looking through a glass darkly. So you can imagine that we have pure sunlight trying to shine through the window, but the window is covered with smudges, which are our false beliefs, which are the things that we believe to be true that are not true. And the result is that the light that we get into the room is less than perfect. It is an experience of the perfect light shining through the dirty window. And what we want to consider is that you and I have the ability, as Trine told us, we have the ability to raise the level of the water gate and improve the flow. We have the ability to clean that window. And that bridge is our consciousness. That bridge is our thoughts. So how much time do we actually spend thinking about our thinking? I just want to share this one idea with you. We had a video chat with our great-grandson a week or so ago, and he said, in his second grader, loved the enthusiasm, wiggle city, he can't sit still for a minute, he's got to be on to doing something else. And he said he wanted to be an inventor, he wanted to invent things. So I told him a little bit about Tesla, and then I sent his mom some background information about how Tesla felt that the inventions kind of were a revelation that kind of came to him all at once, not a thought process. Right? So here's the deal. If I say to you, what is 30 divided by 7? You can think of a process. Right? You might blurt out the answer, you might just know, but you could also think of a process. You could say, well, 30 divided by 7. Well, let's see. 3 times 7 is 21. 4 times 7 is 28. 5 times 7 is 35. So the answer of how many times does 7 went to 30? Well, the answer to that is somewhere between 4 and 5. And I can refine it a little bit further. I can say, well, 28, and then there's 2 left over, and I can move the decimal point, and I can do all this. And how many times does 7 go into 20? It goes into 2. So now I know that it goes in 4.2 something, you see? This is a process. This is a logical process that we're using. And I would ask you, how did you start that process? How did you control that process? Think about this. Think about this. You had an intention. You had an intention to discover the answer. But you went through a methodical process based on what you've learned. Kind of like, for me, it's a voice. It's a self-chatter. And I hear that. And that's what I normally would call my thinking. But there's another way. And I was playing with this week after talking to the little guy about Tesla. I was working on one of my projects out in the garage and was trying to see how to fit things together mechanically. Excuse me. And I had an intention. I had an intention to know how to dismantle something, how to build something and how to take it apart, and to see different ways or to understand different ways that I might construct these things. And then I observed my own thoughts, or at least I call them my thoughts. I observed thought. And what I noticed is that I started to get a series of images in my mind, and the psychologists will tell us that the mental image and a real image, it's hard for us to tell the difference between the two. But it was as if I was sitting in a slideshow in a dark room, and somebody was just running through a series of slides showing me different pictures of the way these things fit together, the way that they came apart, the way to cut them, the way to assemble them, the types of tools to use. And I thought, wow, isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? I set my intention to know something, and I started getting these pictures back that seemed to be a response to my intention. Where did the pictures come from? It's not like I sat down as I would with mathematics and say, well, let's see, 4 goes into 30, 7 goes into 30, excuse me. They were just there. You see, they were just there. And some of the images that came to me were things that I had never experienced before. So it's not like my brain was going back into memory and bringing forth images and recombining them for me. It was things that I had never seen before. So there's this great computer. There's this great knowledge. There's this great wisdom within us. But how many times do we go through life and pay no attention to that? No attention to the workings of our own mind. So what we want to consider this week and going into next week, what we want to consider this week is what Bales was telling us is there's a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief. First, we have to convince ourselves whether or not we believe that. Do we really believe that our thoughts produce changes in our bodies? That the quality of our thinking is presented in our physical bodies? That which we call disease is a disturbed thought made physical? And then if we do believe that, right, if we do, and again I say you must do this, you must be curious, you must do this research on your own, you must do your experimentation on your own, you must decide whether or not you truly believe that what we think has an effect on our physical bodies. Then we want just a little bit of a theory about how that works. And that's where he's starting to get us in this chapter. A little bit of a theory about how this works. So we're going to pick it up there for next week. But what I invite you to do for this week is to think about what you're thinking about. To observe your own thoughts or thought. Don't even call them your own. Just to observe thought. Excuse me. Deliberately set your intention about something that you want to know. I want the answer to this. I want to know that. I'm curious. Be curious. I'm curious to know this. I'm curious to see how that works. And then pay attention. Pay attention to what comes across your field of awareness. I'm trying to think of the name of the company. Somebody will know, I'm sure, and send me an email. But it was a company that produced self-help motivational tapes out of Boulder, Colorado. I think it was the Chicken Soup for the Soul guy. Might have been involved with it, it might have been his company. Can't think of his name either, I'm sorry. But there was a story in there that I want to close with today. The story is this. It was talking about a man who made a living as an intuitive consultant. And that sounds crazy. But what this man would do, according to there's either a book I read or a tape I listened to. What he would do is he would go into a business that had a problem, and they would tell him what the problem was. Then he would go around and he would talk to people who had knowledge of the problem, and he would ask them what they thought, and he would gather up all these different opinions. And then he would go off into the woods for a couple of days on a silent retreat. And he would just observe the thoughts that were coming back to him. And then he would go back to the company and he would make a presentation. And the example that was given was he went to a chemical plant that was having a problem because one of their processes was not working. It was supposed to produce something and it didn't produce it. And this man knew nothing at all of chemistry. Excuse me. He was not a chemist. But he went around and he talked to people and he said, well, this is what it's supposed to do, and this is what it's doing, and this is what it's not doing. And he went around to a bunch of people and he talked to them. He gathered up all this information and he went in the woods and he sat. And he came back. And he went up to the whiteboard in front of the room and he says, I have no idea what this symbol means, but this picture kept coming to me over and over and over again. And he got the dry erase marker and he started to draw something on the board. And one of the engineers in the back of the room said, yep, that's it, and jumped up. And what had happened was what the man was drawing on the board, the chemical engineer perceived that to be the symbols of a chemical process, the chemical process that they were having trouble with. And what the consultant had done was he had drawn the missing piece. He had drawn where the breakdown occurred. And the engineer realized that by adding a certain catalyst to the process, he could produce the very reaction that the man was drawing on the board. And the problem was solved. Now, was he drawing a chemical process? Did the engineer just perceive it and the engineer solved the problem? Who knows? Who knows? But I invite you this week to try that process. Think about something you want to know, and then pay attention to what comes across your field of awareness. Can we tap into the intelligence that created the universe? Can we find a way to work with it? Next week we're going to pick up with the difference between conscious and subconscious thinking and the way that it works. But for this week, the reason that this is important is that the intelligence that created these bodies created them in the image of perfection. And what we want to do is learn how to cooperate with that. And so it is. Okay. Well, I didn't pick up the book that Lori put out for me for closing treatment. So let's do our own closing treatment today. Let us just recognize that there's a power and an intelligence and a kindness and a love in the universe that knows what to do and when to do it and how to do it. It has created us as its instruments, and we are learning and we are growing and we are expanding and we are curious to know more and more and more about how it works as us and through us. So we accept this week all of the opportunities that are presented to us to observe mind in its workings, to pay attention to what we're paying attention to think about what we are thinking about, to learn and to grow in our skill as adventurers in the unexplored territory of mind. We are grateful for this opportunity to be together. We release this treatment to the perfect law, knowing so certain it is done that we say together, and so it is. Excuse me, let me get a sip of water.